Good morning, everybody. This is Stephen Rapundle at Mish Bio. We're going to get underway here in another couple of minutes. Give folks a chance to get online. So just bear with us for another minute or two, and we'll get underway. Thank you. And one of you get on too, just make sure that I'm being heard and stuff. I know it's being recorded. I know that part. All right, we're going to get started on this attendee orientation for the upcoming Michigan Biosciences Day at the Capitol. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for signing up to participate. We've got a record registration and attendance this year so far, and I suspect we'll probably get a few more over the coming days through early next week. We're busy, staff is busy trying to book appointments with legislators as we speak. So it should make for a great event. I know some of you have participated in the past. Welcome back. For those that are new, I think today's walkthrough will hopefully be very useful and enlightening and set you up appropriately for what will be a pretty busy day. So reminder again, the event is on Wednesday, April 10th. So about a week and, well, just about 2 weeks from now, a little less than 2 weeks from now. It's a free event. It's set up just for our member companies and organizations and board members. And really the purpose is to raise awareness of Michigan's bioindustry, its footprint, what its makeup, it's obviously its economic impact. It's meant to educate policymakers as to how Michigan, its sort of status of competitiveness in the global bioindustry marketplace, certainly how we stack up against other states. It's to help them understand what some of the issues are for the bioindustry in terms of future growth and sustaining this robust industry. And it's also, and probably perhaps most importantly, an opportunity for you to talk about your organization, where it fits in the scheme of things in terms of the bioindustry, and what are some of the issues that you're facing and the opportunities for success. Nothing sells better for legislators than to hear from their constituents, because you're the ones that vote, and your employees are the ones that vote. And so there if Mish Bio was of such stature and scale that we could hire lobbyists, those folks would get paid very well, but would probably not have the same impact on legislators as you folks do and can. So really, it's really meant for you to tell your story and grow their awareness about the importance of our industry and why they should pay attention to it. So the event's going to take place at a lobbying firm called Government Consultant Services. It's the same place that we've been at the last 2 years. It's right there in the heart of the Capitol area. It's very convenient, and most importantly, they have a nice second floor space area where we can gather and hold basically all of our activities and use it as a sort of a headquarters for all of that. So everything from the check-in, the continental breakfast, we'll have some briefings available to legislators and their staff. The lunch, and at the end of the day, a reception are going to take place at GCSI. All of your legislative one-on-one meetings that we're setting up are going to take place in the formal office buildings. There's 3 of them. There's the Anderson House Office building. There's the Senate, the Binsfield Senate Office building. And then there's the Capitol building itself that has some of the legislators, mostly folks that are in leadership roles. At GCSI, you're welcome to bring your computers and devices. Wi-Fi will be available, so when you're not in meetings, you can certainly come back, use the GCSI as a base, and get some work done in between. There's going to be food and beverage there all day. Just to kind of give you an orientation, if you haven't really been to downtown Lansing in the capital area, it's fairly straightforward. The nice thing is, as I said, you're only going to be dealing with 3 buildings that you have to go visit potentially, and the 1 building where we're going to be stationed at. So if you look at the top of this slide, with the parking sign, the North Grand Ramp is where you ideally should try to park. Now, it's possible that that particular day, depending on what's going on in the legislature, that deck might be kind of full. So we've pointed out another deck further south, and there's actually a 3rd one that we'll list for you in your packet as well. But the North Grand Ramp one is by far the closest one, because you essentially have to just come out of it on this southwest corner of it, and then just walk half a block and around the corner, and you'll be at GCSI. And then the House Office building, as you can see, is over in half a block in one direction. The Senate Office building, sort of the bottom of that picture, is a mere 2 blocks away, and as is the Capitol. So everything is well within walking distance. The issue will be if you have to have meetings that are back to back in one building and then have to walk over to another building, and so timing will be important, but it's fairly easy to get around. And let me walk you through some of the sort of logistical stuff. We will be providing all the final meeting schedules on the day of the Capitol Day when you check in. We'll try to get you some tentative schedules sooner, particularly if you're somebody that has to have an early meeting, like at 8:30 or 9 o'clock. But in any case, when you do go to these offices, you should identify yourself. Tell them that you're visiting as part of the Michigan Biosciences Day at the Capitol. That's the way we have introduced ourselves when we make these appointments for you. It's likely that you'll be paired up with somebody else, particularly if you are in the same district, perhaps. But it's possible too that in some cases you might be visiting an office alone. We really would like to impress upon you that when you that you stick with the group, or that you not try to add yourself or delete yourself from these schedules and scheduled meetings. Some of the house offices are not large. So there are space limitations, and so also just as a courtesy to particularly the offices, it kind of messes things up. And the same is true. We don't want you to skip any events, or excuse me, any meetings, because these offices ask for who's going to be attending specifically. And if people don't show, then that obviously reflects poorly on us, and reflects poorly on you, particularly if that legislator happens to be your very own representative. So it's just common courtesy, I think, to make sure that you follow through on the appointments that have been scheduled. Also important is that you should arrive on time. If you are running late, and that perhaps is likely to happen, then by all means call the next office that you're going to at least 5 minutes before. We'll provide the phone numbers and let them know of the delay. Usually it's not a problem, but again, they appreciate giving them a heads up. And I would say, as I said, if there's back-to-back meetings that have been scheduled, particularly if you're going from one building to the next, that means you're probably going to have to reduce the time in one meeting and factor in walk time from the one building to the next. So another thing to bear in mind. You should know that at both the House and the Senate buildings have security desks where you're going to have to check in first. Now, and this really only matters for your very first appointment, because you'll get a badge or a sticker at these desks. Once you have that, it should be good for the rest of the day, even if you're coming and going. You just have to represent that visitor pass. You're going to see a range of who you're going to be meeting with. In some cases, it'll include the legislator. In other cases, it'll be just staff. Don't be bothered by the fact that you won't get a chance to meet the actual legislator. This is not uncommon. They're usually tied up in committee meetings, caucus sessions, or they're on the floor of the legislature. And in fact, it's almost preferable to sit down with the staffers, because those are the ones who do all the grunt work, are supposed to be knowledgeable about all the issues that they're supposed to be knowledgeable about, and are the ones that are really whispering in the ears of the legislators as to which way to vote or go on an issue. So do not undervalue meeting with an assistant, despite the fact that they're probably in their early 20s. In some cases, don't let that fool you. These people are pretty well versed, and so give them equal consideration as you would the legislator. They are the legislator's proxy. So now, having said that, if you know that the legislator is going to be in that meeting, and then by all means, that's the priority, and that's the one you definitely don't want to be late for. They tend to not want to stick around, or they'll move on to the next thing. But of course, if you give them a heads up that you're going to be running late, then typically that may in fact keep them there, and so that you can in fact see them. But if they do have to run somewhere, your meetings can be very short, from 5-10 minutes to 15-20 minutes, or even closer to 30. If they are shorter, then you sort of have to be prepared to provide an elevator pitch, and then say something to the effect of, we're happy to come back, or we're happy to have Mish Bio follow up at a more convenient time, where one can discuss matters a little bit more fully. Again, don't take offense. This is fairly common, but it also look at it as an opportunity. It provides you or us the chance to come back. And the more looks and the more meetings we have, the better. If you are going to take photos with a legislator, let's say they're one of, let's say they're your representative, whatever, that's fine. But always ask permission of staff first, so that there are no surprises. Most legislators will be happy to do so. But again, it's common courtesy to ask. And then when you're done, make sure that you thank everybody that you've interfaced with in the office for their time and attention, and be sure that you, if nothing else, bring plenty of business cards, so that they know who you are, they can remember who you are, they can follow up with you afterwards, if they so desire. I will stop there, and let's see here. I'm going to try to unmute everybody and see if there's any questions. Why is this not happening? Bear with me here for a second. I'm trying to turn on the I'm asking for the system to unmute all of you, but for some reason it's not letting me do that. If there are any questions, type them into the question slot there, and I'll try to answer them as they come in. There's one here that's, how long is the webinar? It'll probably be another half hour tops. I'll try to go through the rest fairly quickly. These logistical things are kind of a little painful, but necessary. All right, not seeing any other questions, I'll move on. All right, so and when you go to these meetings, you are going to have a packet to leave behind for the legislators. The packet's going to include the following. That's on this slide. There'll be a letter of introduction from us. There's going to be a bioindustry brochure, as you see down in there in the bottom left. Inside that brochure will be two other items. One, a schematic of what the makeup of the bioindustry is, and then a Michigan bioindustry fact sheet with some various facts and figures. It'll include some policy position priorities, if you will. There'll be about 4 of those on different topics, and we'll get to those a little later. There's going to be a bifold workforce trends analysis that we developed last fall. And then lastly, there'll be our strategic plan for growing the industry called the Bioindustry Roadmap for Success. So that'll all be in a packet with my business card. You'll be able to leave that behind. If there's anything you wish to leave behind from your own organization, by all means, bring that along and leave those behind. I would suggest strongly that you not bring too much stuff. What we have here is already kind of overwhelming. So any, a single collateral piece for your organization would suffice. If nothing else, it again provides an opportunity for a follow-up either from their end or yours. Now, you'll have a packet for yourselves that will have all the materials that I just mentioned in the legislator packet. And in addition, You'll have the agenda with your meeting schedule and contact information for the offices you're set to visit. You'll have the map of the capital area, just so that you don't get lost. And then you'll have some additional talking points or cheat sheet that, again, I'll touch on here a little later. That is your packet. You walk away with that one. That's not one that you will leave behind. And we'll have those appropriately marked so you don't confuse that one with the others. All right, so let me then move on to the policy stuff. So first, you should be acquainted or understand what makes up the industry and what MISH-Bio's sort of purview is. It's fairly broad and covers the area of the following sectors: the ag, industrial, biotech sector, all the pharmaceuticals, medical devices and technologies, anything in the research and diagnostic and testing realm, and then the sector of distribution logistics that move products from all those others. In addition, and now those sectors, each one of those bullets reflects a federal NEX code which identifies each individual facility, not a company, but each facility, as to what goes on in that particular facility. And by virtue of those NEX codes, that allows us to track various metrics that makes up these sectors: employment, number of facilities, etc. The informatics and the health IT space is a little wild and woolly in that it's fast growing. It includes everything from preclinical informatics like genomics and proteomics and stuff to healthcare related information technology. So it's telemedicine, it's wearable apps, it's digital health. A lot of that is still not specifically defined. More importantly, while there's NEX codes for software and things like that, they don't discriminate between what's healthcare related and what's not. So it's harder to get a feel for how big that sector is and be able to track it with regards to its relationship to the biosciences. And so that's why in any fact sheet you won't really see any employment numbers or facility numbers related to the informatics and health IT space, because there really isn't a good way to track them. But hopefully this slide is fairly self-explanatory in terms of what makes up each of the different sectors. But I'll stop there. If anybody has a question, just type it in. I'll be happy to answer it. Try one more time to. Yeah, it's not coming on. All right. All right. So, like I said, that biosciences industry definition or description, along with the fact sheet, is what's going to be inside the bioindustry brochure. The bioindustry brochure just has some of these facts and figures at a sort of a higher level. They're taken directly out of that Michigan fact sheet. That fact sheet is generated every 2 years on the even years by the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, or BIO. We're a state affiliate of that national international organization. And the data that's derived relates back to those NEX codes and is derived via the Department of Labor. So our latest numbers were issued in a report from last year, but the data, the most recent data, is actually from 2016. The next report won't come out till next year, featuring 2018 data. But the point here is that that our industry is large. We're the 13th largest bioindustry in the country. We've got over 40,000 direct jobs. These are high wage salaries. We're definitely a knowledge-based industry. Now that's the average. In some cases, depending on which sector and type of role you're in, it could easily be up 100,000 or more. We've got over 1,700 establishments around the state. In that brochure shows the distribution of those statewide. So I think it's important to point that out. Those pie charts show the distribution based on employment and establishments. If you focus mostly on the employment, you'll see that we're fairly well balanced between the different sectors, excepting the ag, which is very tiny. Med devices has now, I mean, if you exclude logistics distribution and focus more on the sort of the traditional sectors, med devices is now our largest sector, and by some accounts we're either 10th or 11th largest in the country. And so there's been substantial growth in that sector over the years. And it's important to point some of those kinds of facts and figures out. Whoops. The next thing to highlight is the strategic plan that we developed a few years ago. This plan sort of lays out the key priorities and actions necessary to make the state a top 10 bioindustry state. This was an effort that took about a year. We partnered with the business leaders from Michigan and the University Research Corridor on it. We really reached out to the industry, both here within the state and to thought leaders outside of the state that had Michigan ties. So we had focus groups, we did one-on-one interviews and surveys and so forth. We sliced and diced the industry several different ways. What we call functional, which is sort of high-level areas that traverse the different sectors. These are things like access to talent and capital and business climate. We sliced it by the different sectors, and then we sliced it by what we refer to as market areas. Essentially areas that we felt Michigan has a particular strength in. So that would include clinical trials. We're one of the top clinical trial states. At the time, biobanking was surging here in Michigan, and we were leading in many respects in the country the development of that whole area, and so forth. So no matter what your what your backdrop is, irrespective of the sector that you yourself might be in, there's probably information and policy suggestions in that strat plan that you can relate to. And so hopefully we've made it fairly easy for you to identify an area of interest and tease some specifics out that you may wish to convey or use or highlight in your meetings. There is a section of the plan that has some metrics. Obviously, those are now out of date. We're going to be trying to update this plan here in the coming this year, but do know that that data is probably out of date. However, having said that, I would say that the trends that data encompasses are probably not changed a whole lot. The bottom line is that Michigan, despite the size of its industry, despite the strength of its world-class university research enterprises, is not spending or focusing enough in the areas of talent, in terms of or entrepreneurship and things like that. So those trends are probably still valid, even if the actual rankings out of the 50 states are not. So now that the plan has plenty of reading there. It's great if you've got insomnia, but it does have some good stuff. We're not expecting you to know it from cover to cover by any means. It's there as a resource for you if you wish to delve into it. and for that matter, if the legislators wish to delve into it. So let me kind of focus on the four main policy areas that we're putting in front of legislators. The first is the building a biosciences cluster. The fact of the matter is that once upon a time, maybe 15, 20 years ago, Michigan was far more on the map in terms of being recognized as a strong biosciences industry. Now it's unfortunately to the point where the MEDC, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, no longer lists us as a core industry. That's a far cry from when we had the Michigan Life Sciences Corridor Initiative that Governor Engler put in place in 1999. And that initiative really, like I said, established Michigan's bio-industry and put it on the map. It was the envy of many out there. Regrettably, that sort of got diluted over the years during the Granholm administration. And then the last 8 years, we've been basically invisible. And so part of the effort during the Capitol Day, quite honestly, is to raise awareness and interest and show them sort of the impact that we make both on health and economy, and suggest to them strongly that this is, our industry, support for our industry is a great way to not only strengthen but diversify Michigan's economy and ensure us, not only the industry's viability for the future, but Michigan as well. In addition, the third area is, what has been lacking over the last 10 years, I'd say, is any representation of our industry in government or economic development. About 10 years ago, we actually had subcommittees solely focused on the biosciences that were both in the House and in the Senate. They had the ability to move legislation. Those disappeared when Governor Snyder came on board. In addition, unlike other states' economic development agencies, we, at least currently, and haven't had one for a while, have no staff that have a bioscience background and are focused specifically on developing the biosciences from an economic development standpoint. There is no economic development strategy for growing our industry and the like. So I would definitely emphasize that Michigan's policy makers and decision makers have sort of forgotten about our industry. And sort of going hand in hand with that, of course, is the business climate. There's a number of key things that we've sort of lost that really need to be reestablished to help our industry and others too to be competitive again. Most notably, when Governor Snyder came on board, he and the legislature simplified and flattened the Michigan business tax, which was a very onerous and complicated tax. And basically now it's 6%. It's very simple. It vaulted Michigan into the top 10 in terms of a tax preferred state, which was good. However, what happened was that an existing state R&D tax incentive fell by the wayside, and we're now one of only 4 states with no such tax credit. And quite frankly, that's made us less competitive. And particularly if you think about the small companies, because 80% of what we have in our state, or our industry in the state, is really 50 employees or less, and mostly focused in R&D. So something like this would be enormously helpful and would be appealing not only for organic company formation, but for recruiting others to come into the state. Another big issue, of course, has been access to capital. Some of you might be aware that the state put in place about 12, 15 years ago as part of the 21st Century Jobs Fund, a couple of fund-to-funds, and those in recent years have been questioned. The legislature has attempted to cut them out completely. There are essentially two funds, one I think about 90 or so million, another one was about 125. Those are very important funds to have. It allows for investment in our companies, and it entices venture funds out there elsewhere to in fact invest in our companies here. But the legislature has attempted, for budgetary reasons, to try to curtail those, if not completely eliminate them. And so one of our priorities alongside the Michigan Venture Capital Association is to ensure that Michigan continues to invest in these funds. Similarly, there was an angel investor tax credit back in 2010. It sunset after a year in 2011. At the time, Michigan was one of the first, I think, half dozen states that adopted such a tool. Now there's about 28 states that have an incentive for company formation and growth. And basically what it was is it allowed angel investors, so people with individuals of some means to invest in small companies and then get a certain percentage off their income tax. So it served its purpose very well, but unfortunately was only good for 1 year. It would be nice to have that back. And there have been attempts the last 2 legislative sessions bills have been introduced, but they have not really moved forward. There is a bill now, I believe has been introduced or will be introduced to the same effect. We'll see how far it progresses. There are some states that use state funds to match any kinds of angel investment in companies. That certainly is appealing. One of the things that we learned hard and clear from second stage and growth companies was that it was difficult to get financing. The state has done a fairly decent job of trying to manage the valley of death for early startups and put various resources like the venture fund-to-funds and other things in place. But that sort of ignored the more mature companies, ones that are already marketing products and so forth. And so we'd like to see the state put some resources in place for bank financing or some kind of lending tools for those types of companies. And then one of the other things that we've heard over time, and that is it would be nice to have something that would help offset the federal FDA user fees. Those are not inexpensive, particularly if you're a small company, to have to submit your products for review. If there was a way to offset some of that, I think that would be most welcome. In the scheme of things, that's obviously a lesser priority, but it's certainly one that's fairly novel. Obviously, we have a large academic research enterprise here in the state, particularly because of the 3 large universities that make up the University Research Corridor. If I'm not mistaken, my facts and figures, we're 6th in the country for the amount of federal R&D dollars that come in, 1.6 billion. That's with a B as in boy, of which I believe about 1.1, 1.2 billion is for biosciences. The bulk of that, of course, is at the University of Michigan, but Michigan State and Wayne State certainly bring in their fair share. So we've always been strong proponents of ensuring that the state supports innovation and entrepreneurship. As I said a minute ago, the number of programs have been put in place over the years that better interface university and the private sector to ensure better technology transfer, that leverages university research capabilities to conduct private sector product development. So you have things like MTRAC, you have the Business Accelerator Fund, the BAF. Those have all been put in place over, I'd say, the last 10 years, and are really, I think, have been pretty impactful. And we'd like to make sure that that support continues. Again, here, there's been attempts in the last couple of years, not attempts, they have succeeded to cut back funding for this area at the MEDC. I think a few years back, maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, the pool of money was about 25 million. Last year, I think it was down to 17. We'll see what the current budget season bodes for that level. But we have been preaching this to the legislators that we need to see that funding go back up, because it goes to support these programs that I've mentioned. It goes to support you know, the SBIR training programs that are put on by BBC around the state. It's a whole you know, bevy of resources and programs that are supported through that money. And some of those have been in jeopardy of being you know, curtailed completely because of the funding that's been at risk. Something we've called for many years, and that is to increase the state matching of SBIR, STTR grants. We'd like to see it doubled for both phases, or at least in phase 2 up to a cap of 250,000. You go to some other states, you know, places like Kentucky, for example, match 1-to-1 for both phase 1 and phase 2 grants. Those, you know, that makes a big difference for small companies, and so we'd like to see the state up their investment in that regard. Also, what things that we've heard over the years has been, can we get some assistance for paying for those for a group like BBC, for example, to draw up those SBIR applications. And you know, we're talking there about $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. Again, that, you know, that may not seem like a lot, but for a small startup, that's huge. Lastly is the area of workforce and talent. In that bioindustry roadmap for success, I think one thing that stood out above all was talent. In one form or another, people basically said, if we don't focus on talent and ensure a skilled workforce for the future, then we're not going to be able to grow organically. We're not going to be able to recruit companies here. And quite frankly, this is probably the one area that the state has done most poorly in, and really lacks much focus, certainly when it comes to our industry. About 12, 15 years ago, the state, as part of the Life Sciences Corridor Initiative, had a program, for example, whereby it placed interns and co-ops, so co-ops were recent graduates, and placed them at companies, in the case of co-ops, up to 6 months, where these people got trained beyond their academic education, and in many cases then were hired by those companies. That same program also helps subsidize talent recruitment for small companies. You know, talent recruitment is not cheap, particularly if you're looking at C-suite and, you know, senior management. And so the program would help subsidize the costs of travel and so forth to bring people in for interviews and what have you. It was a very successful program. I came in on the very tail end of that. MishBio managed that program on behalf of the state. Very, very successful program. We've tried for years to get it back. Of course, the economy there in the latter part of the last decade was not conducive to that. And so we'd like to get something like this back on the legislative radar screen. There are many other states that put resources and support behind industry sanctioned talent training programs and facilities. You know, these range from everything from training folks for biomanufacturing, certainly to you know, device manufacturing production. Some of other states do set them up for example, to train high school graduates. Florida is a good example of that. In other cases, in Georgia, those are for like community college level. But whatever it is, it's been done hand in hand to meet industry specific needs. So for example, you know, what I always like to say when I go talk to legislators, you know, if Kalamazoo Valley Community College can have a craft brewing training program, surely they can do one that's set up for Pfizer and or Stryker to have you know, bio or med device manufacturing. And with both of those companies expanding greatly in that neck of the woods, you know, it behooves us to look at things like this as a means to ensure that future workforce. But really, what we're asking for is to do a thorough assessment, find out what the needs are and the supply is, and address those gaps appropriately with the support of the state government. Now, there is an existing Michigan Corporate Relations Network program that does help fund some talent. These are typically for C-suite types, but it's not huge. We certainly, at the very least, like for it to continue to receive funding and perhaps even expand it. Another one, which was very useful back when, of course, it came out of crisis, and that was when Pfizer decided to shut down the Ann Arbor facility. The state put in place what was called the Pfizer Asset Retention Fund, and it basically subsidized placement of those former Pfizer employees at other facilities in the state, other companies in the state. You know, some of which were smaller companies who couldn't afford the types of salaries that Pfizer employees enjoyed, and so this this program helped sort of defray that for, I think, for a 2-year period and such. It was a great way to retain that talent. We'd like to see something put in place along similar lines, so that when assets are lost in one establishment, they can be you know, rerouted to another one and keep those assets here in Michigan. As I said a minute ago, we really don't have a full grasp of what the demand is and what the supply is for various talent and workforce in our industry. I mentioned earlier that we are including a first ever workforce trends analysis for Michigan that begins to speak to some of that, but it's not very sophisticated in terms of the data set that it tries to pull from. We'd like to do something more exhaustive. We've had some discussions over the years with the talent folks at the state of Michigan to try to get something off the ground, but it seems every time we move the needle forward, there was a change in personnel, a change of heart, and whatever, and so we've never really gotten very far with that. But it's, to us, it's still a priority. A good example, I mean, it's easier to track, obviously, folks in the more traditional sectors, but it becomes very difficult, for example, in the clinical trial space. You know, that's a huge industry. We're, I think, 11th in the country for the number of trials we conduct. But how do you get a handle on how many people are engaged in that, and what are the demands for additional talent and workforce? You know, a nurse who's involved in clinical trials is probably not listing her separately the clinical trial engagement. She's just being listed as a nurse, and so we'd love to, you know, what we'd like to do is be able somehow to tease that out, and so those kind of assessments are important. Other states that have put a focus on talent and workforce have done things like that. And then the last bullet is just, focusing and ensuring that our kids really get the science curriculum that's necessary for them to be able to work in our industry. Regrettably, Michigan is not in the top tier of states by any stretch when it comes to science education standards. And certainly we've been trying to impress upon the legislature that this is a wise investment and for the future of the state. All right, well, that's really all that I have. That's probably a lot thrown at you, but it's not something easily that we could just do the day of. I mean, once upon a time we did, and I think one of the reasons we started these prep webinars was to kind of give you some of that background a little earlier. We will make available all the documents that I talked about that are going to be present in your packets to you certainly by midweek next week, so that way you can sit down and peruse through some of this stuff, pick out what you think is most relevant for your particular situation or sector or organization. By all means, if you have questions, I'm available. Give me a call, shoot me an email. Happy to answer your queries. Don't be intimidated by all of this. This is merely a courtesy call, if you will. In many respects, look upon it as that way. The intent is not to overwhelm them, but to get across some key points. And then use that as a means to come back at a future time and perhaps talk more specifics, get in front of a committee to testify about this or that, and so forth. So I'll stop there and ask if anybody has any questions, please just type them in. Otherwise, as I said, feel free to give me a call or an email afterwards. Well, I turned on a few of you. Now you're, so if anybody wants to speak up, somehow it worked for some. Others, I think you've actually muted yourselves, so you have control. Any questions? Let's see.
If you can hear me, I think it was a good presentation. I'm just looking forward to getting the materials to start digesting and putting this thing together.
Yeah, again, we've got a record crowd. I think we're up to 22 people signed up, so it's going to be a busy day. The more the merrier. The more we can. There's been a lot of turnover in the legislature, so this year is particularly important because there's plenty of folks that simply are not aware of our industry. Many don't even realize they might have heard a name of whomever, but may not really understand what goes on. There's a lot of misinformation out there. Many people, for example, think Pfizer's completely gone when in fact they aren't. And in fact, they have their world's largest manufacturing facility, and the fact it's the largest manufacturing facility of any pharmaceutical company right here in Michigan. And they're expanding to the tune of $750 million. Stryker, a lot of people aren't aware of a Perrigo or a Diplomat Pharmacy. These are all leaders, not only here domestically, but globally. And but just as important are the small little entities. Everybody plays a role. Everybody contributes to this industry. And the message that you need to get across is that we're just as important as any other industry. We bring more to the table than aerospace and defense, which tend to be mentioned a lot of times outside of automotive, and yet our industry is bigger than both of those put together. So we're going to put little talking points, a little cheat sheet together for you for those kinds of things. You know, you can feel free to just speak to those and let the rest be digested by the staffers and so forth. You know, we're not expecting you to be instant experts and convey all this detail over. That's what follow-up is all about. So.
Yeah, I personally think that the cheat sheet, like you just went over, our industry is bigger than aerospace and, you know, et cetera, kind of makes a quick, simple, good point to get attention. So any of that kind of stuff, I'd definitely appreciate.
Yeah, yeah. There was another question here. Will the presentation be available online? Yes, for those that couldn't make it. This presentation has been recorded, and we'll put that out online. We'll ping all the registrants with the link. So if you want to see it again, you can. And hopefully those that weren't present today will get a chance to view it and come up to speed on that. Let's see, I think that's all the questions that I see at the moment. So thank you everybody for joining. I appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you on the 10th. Oh, one last recommendation. Bring your best, most comfortable shoes. And don't mean to sound sexist, but in particular, if you're a woman, please wear low heels. If any at all, because you're going to be doing a lot of walking. You put a lot of steps on your Fitbit, and your feet are going to be tired as it is without having to have worn the wrong shoes. So be prepared. And attire is business attire. So I recommend ties for men and so forth. So.
All right.
And don't forget your business cards. Thank you, folks.
Good.
Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks.